All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supply Chain Certified. Today's guest is someone who's made it his mission to simplify the most frustrating part of entering the EU market, and that's CE certification. I'm very, very excited to welcome to the show Alex Volf, founder of CEEZ, a consultancy helping manufacturers navigate the maze of CE compliance quickly and cost effectively. He's had over 20 years of experience in engineering and regulatory roles in global companies like Bosch, Parker, and Hendrickson. Alex has seen firsthand how compliance, when done right, can unlock speed, trust, and global scale. He holds an MBA from Cranfield School of Management and a mechanical engineering background. And today he's turned his insight into a pragmatic, no-nonsense service model that's resonating with manufacturers across Europe. So Alex, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Great. Well, Alex, to start, before we jump into compliance, before we jump into, CEZ and all the work that you're doing, maybe you can tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, how you grew up, your background, and then what got you, into this world of compliance. Maybe you can just share a little bit about that.
Yeah. My background is I'm a Czech national, so I was born in what was back then in Czechoslovakia, so that's where I grew up. And then I was sort of going around the world with all these companies you just mentioned. So I was in the UK, and I sort of got the background, the cultural and the professional background in the UK. I live now in Germany, so this is another one. I lived in the US also briefly. So this has also shaped myself, seeing different perspectives of different people, of different cultures, which is quite important. And when we go back to the professional side, so the compliance, so I just came to it just like most of the people, the CE compliance, we're in Europe. And even in Europe, it's a kind of a mystery for everyone because everyone sees it everywhere. These famous the CE mark, but no one really knows what does it mean. And as I was in the engineering, I came to it just like, what is the story of the most companies? There is some machine, there is some device, and suddenly someone finds out you need some CE certification. So you slowly get into it, and then you sort of open up all this Pandora box of that subject. So that's how I got into it. So I'm in oil and gas, right? So this is very, very complex technology. I'm in the in subsea business, and that's the you collect electronics, electrical, hydraulic side, mechanical side all together. And in this complex environment, then you start to apply the compliance when you're selling somewhere in the Europe. And that's how I came to it. And if I listen to the stories of other people on the engineering side, it's always very similar. Someone finds out, oh, we need a compliance, we'll need to get someone to get it. And then people just jump into it, and then they open up all that Pandora box, and they usually are surprised what they have to do. So it's complexity on one side, but that's what I actually noticed. You can actually look at it relatively simply, and you can simplify. Yeah.
That's great. So Alex, just for, I try to use this podcast also a way to educate my audience on the basics of compliance and them understanding the details. So maybe for a layman, how would you explain like what CE means? What is it, what does it mean to be CE compliant? Like maybe just give us the very high level, the breakdown on, if you're explaining it to a kindergarten or something, like what is CE compliance?
So CE compliance, at the end of the day, it's really a mark which allows you to sell product in European Union. It's simple as that. If you've got a CE marking, you can do it. If you don't have a CE marking, if you sell stuff if you export stuff, it can be stopped on the border. So it will not be allowed into the EU. And if you're already selling in the EU, or if you're a local manufacturer, all your production can be stopped. So it's like a license to sell, if I put it like that. And it is about safety. It's really about safety. What this is legislation, which is basically making sure no one gets harmed, everyone is safe. So that's what it really is. Yeah.
I see. That makes sense. And do the rules around CE marking change often from the government? And like how much of that has to be tracked regularly, or is it pretty standard in terms of getting the, an approved CE mark?
Well, it's we can talk about it for hours, but I'll try to keep it simple, right?
Yes.
So the legislation, you can get, if you have a simple product, it can be very, very straightforward, very quick. If you have a very complex product, then you have to do all the engineering stuff, which is related to engineering anyway. So that's what the engineers do, but you have to put it into this framework of the CE. So I think what is important to say is that the CE, it's as you said, is it changing a lot, and it's not really. It's very structured framework which has been developed over decades in the European Union, and it's legislation, so it's really a law. That's what people sometimes don't understand. It is a written law, written in a legal language. But what they try to do is to make that legislation very connected together. So it would go against the philosophy if you would have a legislation in 2010 and then you completely change in 2020. Then the whole industry in Europe and the importers also, it would disrupt the business. So what the philosophy is to make sure that everyone is safe, but to promote the business, to promote the economy in the EU and allow the importers to import. So making things safe, but at the same time making sure that people don't get bogged down in complexity, that they're actually able to do that, because then basically the economy would suffer if you would do it too complicated, or if you couldn't count on the legislation which would be relatively stable.
I see. And what is the process to get an approved sort of CE mark, and maybe you can also tie a little bit into CE Easy and how does it fall into that process, and how do you what do you expect from your customers and what do you sort of help them with? Maybe you can talk about the process and how that works.
Yeah. So if you want to get a CE certification, so you, as I said, you first look at the product. What kind of a product you have? Is it, if it can be a product which doesn't need a CE certification. There are certain products, like simple tools. There are some products which simply, textiles, they just don't fall under the CE, so you just don't have to really worry about it. Then there are other products which fall under it. So I think the first question is really, if you're an exporter, you just have to ask, I have this product, does it fall under this legislation? If it doesn't, and if you get an answer, this doesn't fall under this legislation, then you're okay, and you can sell to Europe without any issues. Then if you establish this product is falling under the CE certification, then you have to establish under which kind of CE certification, because you have different types of certification. Electrical products, you have electromagnetic compatibility, you have machineries, you have toys, you have products for medicine and so forth. So you have to establish under which category it falls. And then usually the process is that you have to collect the documentation. You have to do some kind of risk assessments. You basically make this bundle all together, and then you say, okay, I've got everything, and I can certify. I can put this little CE mark on it, and then I'm okay. Also, then it gets more complicated. You need, for example, if it's something which is very dangerous, you can have something which could be an explosive atmosphere, something which could be under high pressure, then you would need a notified body. But that's where we're going sort of a little bit further for a very complex product. But if we stay simple, if we stay with the simple products, usually you just look at the product, does it fall under the directive, which directive it is, then you look at your documentation. For simple products, you will not have too much. And then you put something which is called technical file. You bundle all the documentation together, and then you declare the CE. And then you create what you call a CE certificate, declaration of conformity, which is basically a piece of paper saying, I declare that I conform to the CE. And with that, you can sell to Europe, or you can manufacture in Europe.
You don't need any external body to certify that. You can self-declare that you have the CE mark, on your side.
It depends what you do. So exactly, if you have a simple product, if you have product which is not that that dangerous. So if you would have a machine, if you would have a product which is under pressure, but the pressure is not too high, then you can self-certify, and that's what the legislation tells you. You know, if you doesn't fall into a certain category, you certify yourself, and this is the advantage of the European legislation, because what it does, that's the philosophy. That's the big difference people have to look at. You don't need any external body for most of the regular products to get you certified. You can do it yourself. That's what they call presumption of conformity. They presume you automatically conform. They don't look at you. They just say, you've got certificate of conformity and we presume you conform. So you don't have to go into expense and investment to get your product certified. You can, if you understand what to do, and if you have certain product portfolio, which is relatively same. So once you do it once, then you know the steps and you can do it again and again and again, and you can self-certify, and you don't have to be expert in it, because if you have certain product, you then understand what to do. So that's a big advantage of this legislation. And the purpose of that legislation is that if you imagine we live in Europe, and how many countries we have in the EU, I don't know, 25 or something like that. I lost the count now.
Sure.
And if you imagine that, you know, I am from a smaller country just called Czech Republic. I drive for half an hour, I hit the border. I drive for 2 hours the other side, I hit the border. All the other countries, and imagine in the world where there used to be borders, you had whatever you sold, it had to go through the customs. You had to have it certified under different legislation. So for the trade, it was not good. So basically, philosophies, we want to allow everyone to make it simple for them as possible to be able to sell the products in Europe, but at the same time make sure that it is safe, that, you know, it doesn't endanger anyone. So that's basically the philosophy. So there is no philosophy of the legislation going after someone and trying to catch him. It's really allowing everyone to be able to sell the products in Europe, make it as easy as possible, but making sure that we don't have products which are dangerous for people in Europe. So that's really the philosophy of it. Yeah.
Makes sense completely.
Yeah.
And when you work with like some of your clients and, you know, and sort of these companies that you've seen over the years, have you seen them make any common mistakes or any things that they probably do incorrectly that prevents them from getting certified, you know, appropriately? Like maybe you can talk through, you know, just for the audience, like, you know, what are some of the things that you might get wrong, or things that you got to keep an eye out for, you know, just while going through this process?
So I come from the engineering world, a little bit of sort of more complex products. So I don't have experience with the stuff like toys and simple products. So
right.
I can't really talk about that. But if I talk about let's say the more complex products, I think that's a typical world of engineering, that engineers, they tend to overcomplicate things. They tend to be very complex, and they struggle.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. So because and I mean, it makes sense, because the engineer, he has legal responsibility. If he does a mistake and some machine hurts someone, then he's the guy who goes in front of the judge and he has to explain himself, right? So I can understand that the engineers, they're careful. So they have a tendency to make it too complex. But the CE legislation is actually made in a way that it doesn't want people to be too complex. It gives you possibilities, interpretation, because it is a law. And that's what the engineers struggle with. And I think a lot of people from outside Europe as well, because engineers often see this as a standard, because they're used to working with the standards. So standards tell me you do A, you do B, you do C. Then you come to this and it tells you, well, if you want to, you can do this. And if you believe you can do this, you can do that, which people, especially engineers, struggle with. It doesn't tell them exactly what they're supposed to do. And it is written in legal language, which makes it much more complicated, because they read it as it is, but it doesn't mean exactly what it means. It's legal language. So that's what people struggle with. And then they often over-certify. And then it starts to snowball into the people trying to get the consultants, trying to get the notified bodies. And there is a big industry which is connected to it, where people actually like it to be complicated, because then they can they can then consult, they can charge
Right.
the hours, you know, and they say you need this and you need that. Engineers are happy because they see that, you know, you're certifying a lot, and these companies, they make their money. But I think there are a lot of companies which are sort of the smaller ones, they struggle with it because they just simply do not have resources to do that, and they often get overwhelmed by that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can certainly see that. I'm guilty as charged, in terms of engineers trying to overcomplicate things, and then you bring in, like you said, maybe consultants or others to sort of help you simplify. So, it might make sense to just start off from, a place of like keeping it simple from day one. And I think in the world of compliance, there's just a lot of complexity, and I think the governments also don't make it very easy, right? Sometimes in terms of just explaining, what it takes to get to a certain level of compliance, and we all struggle with just trying to get some normalcy to the chaos that's out there in general. So I can certainly see that. But I wanted to ask, how much do you rely, in the case of CE marking, just like you have in environmental compliance, things like ROS, REACH, etc., you have to collect a lot of data from your suppliers, and you have to bring all their certificates, etc. Is in CE marking, there's no supplier collaboration? Is that correct, my understanding, or is that incorrect?
No, you need suppliers, because if you have, as I said again, if you have a simple part, and you manufacture
Yep.
yourself something which is very simple, and let's say that material is not dangerous, so you don't have to go into an environmental legislation,
Right.
then you don't deal with that. But now, if you have a more complex machine, which could be
Yep.
also computer, I mean, you don't have to go to something which is exotic, something everyone knows is a computer. You have a lot of
Right.
subcomponents which go into it, and computer is a good example. All those subcomponents, for example, they have to comply to what we call ROHS here in Europe, which is
Yep.
basically
Yep.
saying, there are 6 substances and there's big
Right.
no, you cannot use them, right? So it's basically
Mm-hmm.
in a legal language, very long legal language, it's saying, these 6 substances, you cannot use them. And in
Right.
order to comply, you need to get from each supplier that
Yes.
confirmation on this with CE marking ROHs that they do not have that. So if you have a more complex machine, or if you have something which is these parts which have to comply to this environmental legislation, you really have to go to them if you don't have that system, and you have to
Right.
go ask them, I need this, I need this, I need this. And that's what a lot of companies struggle with, really, because often these suppliers, they don't even know what these people want. If it's something like a niche supplier of something special, they often even don't have that, and you're then standing in front of a problem. How do I certify my product if I have a component which doesn't have that certification? And what can even happen sometimes, that you just have to go somewhere else and try to find a different part which complies. So that can be either not really relevant if you have a simple part. It can be extremely relevant if you have something which is complex, which especially with these environmental laws, that's very important. So I would definitely say, if you're a sort of smaller manufacturer of the complex product, check with your suppliers if you have the critical product in there, if they supply you with this kind of certification, because you can have a problems later, definitely.
Yeah, you're so right. And of course, my clients, but also talking to other manufacturers, etc. out there, that seems to be a big blocking factor in getting to a certain level of compliance quickly, is just that supplier collaboration piece. And like you rightly said, suppliers don't know, or they don't respond, or it's lost in some email in their spam box, or they have to go to some portals and log in there and upload documents, and it's a complicated process, and all that typically creates a delay. And are you seeing like that being the primary sort of challenge sometimes in this industry, is just the collaboration across the supply chain, because it gets complicated and you have to sort of bring all these documents together? Would you say that's the biggest challenge, or there are other sort of challenges that manufacturers have to face outside of that?
I think it depends. That's always the word. It depends. I'm sorry. I have to
Yes.
say that because it's so
No,
complex.
you're
But
right.
I would say it really depends. If you are a manufacturer, I would say this example. So if you're a manufacturer who's used to doing the C certification, let's say that your products are relatively similar, you have a similar design, and you have already your supply chain. You developed your supply chain to deliver that certification, then they're used to it. So basically that's not a problem for you. But I believe that the development of that supply chain, that's definitely a problem. And there can be some suppliers which, as I said, you probably have to switch because they just cannot comply to that. So I would say industries which have a certain product portfolio which is standardized CE, they have developed their supply chains and they just basically know each other. They know what to deliver. Then they just carry on. If you're in an industry like a small company which is creating different products, like engineering products, different machines with very different subcomponents, I think that can become very critical part, because they always work with different suppliers. Maybe the amount of what they're buying is not that high, so they're not really top of the list of these suppliers, and that can become very, very difficult for them then to get the compliance. So in this case, I would always recommend check with those suppliers upfront if they can supply with this kind of certification, because likely it could be really an issue.
I see. No, that makes sense completely. And what's the typical cost of non-compliance here, Alex, from your perspective? Like, say you don't, like, is essentially you can't sell, and like, what if you do sell in that market? Like, is it technically like it's technically illegal, right? Or you won't be, like, what is the cost of non-compliance? How would you quantify that?
Yeah. So first of all, of course, you break a law. So it is a law. So we're talking about the law. So it's proper law which says you are supposed to do something, and if you don't do it, you're breaking the law, and so there come penalties. The penalties. So if I would stay in the legal world, the penalties, they say, you can get some kind of a fine. In some countries, you can even go to jail. And in some countries, you can get your products can be banned. But in practical world, no one really wants to get someone into jail. I've never heard actually, I've never heard a case that someone will go to jail because of the CE. That I don't think it's probably never ever happened. But it's something like in French legislation, it's possible. But I would say what's more sort of practical way of doing it. If you imagine you're a supplier, you're delivering something which doesn't have a CE, you sell it to Europe, it goes into the market, and then someone just picks it up, and he can go literally, I can take any product which I have here on the table, I can go into database, and I can just write this product, I have I believe, there's, for example, there's some banned substance in it, and actually the authorities will check it. And what they say, all these products, they have to go out of the market. Now you have all the costs, you have to get all the people who bought the product, you have all the investigations, you have to go into all these pains to get it back. So you can see just for a small, simple toy, for example, you can get into a lot of trouble. If you're if you have a complex machine and let's say you sell a product which is a few $100,000 or euros or a few million, and imagine you've got this machine and you bring it into the EU somewhere, it's not switched on, so you can still actually physically bring it in. But at the time you switch it on, the CE has to be valid. And then someone comes over and he says, your CE certification, it's not valid. You cannot basically switch this machine on. And they will not switch it on because they know that if the authorities would get them, then they would actually get into trouble. So you can have an investment of few million, which is just standing somewhere, and you're trying to figure out how to certify it and losing money, every day. So that's the practical things of that non-compliance. So of course, if you're a Chinese supplier who's somewhere on, some portal like Alibaba, these guys, they just make you a certificate. If you send them an email, they'll send you a C certificate, because there is no risk for them. But once you're established in Europe, or if you're a wholesaler, or if you're importer, then you can get, the financial risk can be significant. It's possible, 50 times out of 10 times out of 50, or 10 times out of 100, nothing happens. But then something can happen, and then you can incur quite a high cost. So It's
I see.
definitely this.
And is there a lot of fraud in this industry in the sense that people will send, you know, just or some supplier might just send like a declaration that says, okay, I'm CE certified or whatever, and it's fake or doesn't really, it's not actually going to the rules. Like, do we see a lot of maybe fraud or abuse of any sorts here?
I think the abuse comes usually from the portals which are selling directly to Europe piece by piece. So I think
I see.
that's what Europe is struggling with a little bit, is that you've got now a lot of these companies which basically sell you one piece from abroad, and they sell a lot of the products, but they send it to individuals, and it's very hard to track. And I think they struggle with that a little bit. But if you're talking about high volumes, if you're talking about machinery which is expensive, or if you're talking about the wholesale, then it's very easy. If it comes to the port and the authorities just open the box and they see, oh, I have no CE declaration, then they just leave it there and they stop it. So it can get, from that point of view, that's relatively easy. And if you have got a complex machinery, I mean, the risk is so high that anyone who does it, they probably think twice before they do that, because it just doesn't make any sense for them to incur the costs which would be related to that. If you invest 1 million into a machine, it just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. And are there certain industries, Alex, that are more susceptible? I know you talked about the different types of products, but are there more certain industries that, there's more of an audit eye on or something, as opposed to some others that might just get a free pass? Should some industries be more careful when they are getting their CE marking?
Well, now let me think. I would say like this, because that's the philosophy of that legislation. They don't go after individual things. There are no policemen or the kind of CE police which is checking everything, and you can hear it from the presumption of conformity. They just presume that you conform. So
I see.
And they create sort of a framework where they say, if there are products which are not so dangerous, I mean, we don't have resources to go out after everything. We just assume this is working well. We're not going to try to catch someone. We don't have the resources for that, and it's not so important. But if you come into products which are more dangerous, which could cause more harm, or which are, for example, the medical devices, if you've got something which is for explosive atmospheres, you've got something under high pressure, if you've got some mechanical device, if you've got things like that, then they really look at it more. And those industries, these industries have to be very careful what they are doing, because they can get in trouble very, very quickly, because also the notified bodies are often involved. And then the eyes are on these products much more than, let's say, if you're delivering some wholesale products, and you can develop for 3 years and you don't have any issues even with CE marking, which is not correct, and then maybe someone at the port catches your products and they just stop it. So the more potential for harm there is, the more eyes are looking at these products, definitely. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. And Alex, let's just switch gears maybe a little bit in terms of, where the landscape is today in terms of, CE marking, EU regulations. Like, where do you see this industry going? Is it going to become more complex? Do you think we're going to see a reduction in regulation? I know in the US, given the governmental changes here, with the new president, etc., there's a push now to reduce regulation as a whole. But are you seeing something similar in the Europe or not? And it's like, hey, we're going to continue to push the regulatory frameworks, and that's the government's sort of perspective in general. Where do you see the industry going as a whole? Just if you had to project out.
Yeah, I think Europe is very different in the sense that you have EU and you have national governments, right? So the national governments, that's sort of like you have US, you have elections once in 5 years and things change very rapidly. Politics come into play. EU is very complex beast, which is not susceptible to changes in the politics, because you've got all these states together and they try to find a compromise. And basically everyone in Europe is seeing benefit in having something which allows the businesses to thrive. So this legislation, usually what happens is if you have certain directives, they try to make them better and better and better with each iteration. So it's more understandable. But of course, then you have a new legislation which is being introduced, especially now the environmental is a big thing. Now the big thing are the batteries. Everyone's talking in Europe because we have new directives for the batteries. And of course, we'll see how they start, because usually when they begin, they don't really know where the industry is. They try to talk. Actually, what they do consultation with the businesses, they do consultation with the industry. So if you have a big business and you want to steer it somewhere, you actually can get involved and you go to Brussels and you talk to those legislators. So they actually talk to businesses. They try to make it, but at the beginning, depending on the industry, we don't know where the battery industry will be in 5 or 10 years. So I think they try to sort of get the feel how it is, make sure that, you know, we don't get into some kind of wild west with the batteries. There are more vehicles with the batteries, so we don't dump batteries somewhere on the dump. So I think they try, but I think there are probably a lot of discussion with the experts, and everyone has a different perspective. But I would say let's wait and see for this new legislation. But I would say from the experience, they try to make it better, and they don't try to overcomplicate it. Usually, they try to make it more smooth, and they try to correct the mistakes they made in the last iteration. So that's my experience with the legislation. Yeah.
And in your perspective, this is maybe more a personal sort of question. Do you feel like the regulatory frameworks in the EU, do they hurt or do they help sort of the consumers as a whole? Like, is it a good thing for society as a whole, or do you think, well, there's too much regulation, government should sort of move away from it? Like, what's your perspective on that? Just would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think probably that when we talk about the American audience, you know, so there's this perspective, you know, the state shouldn't get into citizens' way. We don't want to have a big government.
Right.
You know, if you come to Europe, I think the mindset is sort of different, so people sometimes don't understand it. But in Europe, people, I think there's also this tendency to overcomplicate things, bureaucracy and all that stuff. So I think, given the environment in many European countries, which sometimes get bogged down in bureaucracy, I think this legislation is more on the side of trying to make things standardized for all the states, and maybe for some states like Scandinavian, or maybe like type like Netherlands, or what used to be UK, they would probably say, oh, you complicate it a little bit too much. But I would say if you go in direction of maybe like Germany, maybe states like France and other countries, I think then they help to simplify matters a little bit and to bring the playing field for everyone the same. So I think it really depends, as you say, on the perspective. Me personally, I believe what I see from my experience, this is helping citizens, because they really, if you get a product which has a CE and you know this could be a dangerous thing, usually there is some engineering behind it, making sure that it is not dangerous. So from that point of view, I think it's definitely beneficial. Yeah.
Got it. No, that makes sense completely. Yeah, and you're so right in terms of the mindset difference in the Europe, in the EU in general, and the States, right? It's a very sort of different, you know, and you know, there's always arguments on both sides as to, you know, whether this is good or bad for society as a whole. So it's like, I'd love to get different people's perspectives on this. And, you know, another wave we are seeing now is technology and AI, and, you know, all the sort of new waves like Industry 4.0, and, you know, there's sort of supply chain disruption in terms of, you know, how technology is getting adopted in the supply chain as a whole. What's your perspective on that? You know, does technology have a strong place to help improve some of these processes, like collaboration across the supply chain, potentially, you know, doing automated CE marking, like stuff like that, right? Like, there's so many use cases that we can see where AI and technology can be applicable. Would love to get your perspective on how do you see the adoption of tech into some of these processes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about it, but it's like having a crystal ball, isn't it? Nowadays, it's so we don't know what's going to happen in 1 year. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 years, at least from my perspective. It's very hard for me to imagine. I see it very positively. I can see that especially the AI, that's it's a revolution really, because from my perspective again, because if I look at my world in engineering, if nowadays engineers sit together, everyone is just doing things through ChatGPT, because
Yes.
and I don't mean in a way that they don't know, but it's like
Right.
having a personal assistant, someone who can get the data very quickly, someone who can check things. CE legislation, you can ask, can you please explain to me this sort of legal language, what it does it actually mean? Can you give me the standard? And only going into this little world, I can see how the efficiency has improved sometimes fivefold, sevenfold, and it's just the beginning. Right. So, and I'm not even talking about people creating systems with AI. I'm just talking about the most basic AI that people use for their personal assistants, and I can see it every day now. So, and it wasn't there 1 year ago, and it's here now, and I can see also like people who don't jump on the bandwagon personally, just personally on individual level, they really are left behind a little bit. You know, there are other people who, because of their using these tools, they get ahead quite a lot as a learning tool, as a personal assistant, and so on. So now, if we take how much automatization this AI can do, I see the sky's the limit right now. It's I don't know where it's going, but I can see how this is going to automate a lot of things, because you can imagine just the paperwork, checking documentation, exactly. You know, just making these checks. Nowadays you employ hundreds of people, and this can be done suddenly very quickly, automatically, put it in a certain framework. So yeah, I think we'll see big disruptions, and I think the people who jump on it also from the business side, I mean, that's going to be very exciting and very interesting and very beneficial, I believe, as well.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right, and I truly believe that people shouldn't be worried about their jobs getting eliminated with AI and the adoption of AI, as opposed to being worried about their jobs getting eliminated because they're not using AI effectively to do their work. And so the employees of the future, in my opinion, are going to be folks who effectively can use AI for their work. Like you rightly said, the simple use cases using GPT and some of those. The most complicated use cases is tomorrow the compliance manager is going to say, hey, why should I be reading the document manually? I should have the AI parse it and give me all the data quickly, and check for the CE marking automatically or something. I don't know, whatever those use cases are, right? Yeah. And I should have AI generate the email that goes to the supplier automatically and follows up with them, right? So things like that, just small use cases in your workflow, as employees start picking up, they're going to be more efficient, more productive. Boards and CEOs and presidents are going to see this as a way to, not increase headcount for the sake of it. You can selectively decide what your headcount needs are, because you have these assistants that are helping each and every existing employee. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I do think we're in the early stages, but it's moving pretty fast, the industry as a whole. And the adoption to our sector in manufacturing and supply chain and is happening faster than I expected this time around. So which is good to see. Great.
Yeah, it's a revolution, really. It seems to be like a true revolution. Yeah.
Exactly. So Alex, as we sort of wrap up this conversation, maybe tell our viewers a little bit about, CEZ, your company, what do you folks do? What place do you sort of solve, in this industry? I know we touched a little bit upon it, but maybe you can tell us a little more so that people know, where to find you and how do they get in touch with you, etc. Would be great to just hear from you.
Yeah, so if you want to get in touch with me, so I'm on LinkedIn, so Alex Volf, CEZ, or you can just go to my website, which is ceez.org, and you can just log in, and then you'll see all the information in there. And as I said, I'm at the early stages, so I just started. I built up the site. I'm just doing the early marketing. So I'm sure most of your viewers probably they could give me some hints on the marketing, how to find the clients. That would be probably a podcast on its own. But really, what I would like to utilize is the mission of don't making things too complex, because that's what I've seen in the industry. And if people come to me and we look and we sit down, we look at the product, whether it's a simple one or whether it's a complex one, to look how we can do it as efficient as possible without too much complicated language, and make it understandable, because at the core of the whole legislation, you can actually explain it very simple and people can understand it. It's not that complicated if you just explain it properly. So that's my mission. That's what I'm excited about. Really, if people come and they are scared about the CE marking, they don't have the resources, and we can get it done relatively quickly and painlessly. That's my mission, and that's going to be wonderful to do. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, folks, you heard it from Alex himself. Definitely check him out on his website, and you can certainly find him on LinkedIn as well. But Alex, really enjoyed this conversation. I was definitely enlightened and educated on CE marking and as a whole, and some of the opportunities for the future, but all the challenges that some of manufacturers have to navigate, and where the space is going. So really appreciate this conversation. Thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll find you on another podcast with us soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.